Welcome back to the Vino Geek podcast. This week, as you can tell by the title, we're taking the piss out of myself and other reviewers. I was sent a clip of people taking the Michael out of wine reviews and critics examining and analysing wine and reviewing wine, and I thought, that's so good. I have to do an episode purely based on that. Why do we say the things we do? Why do we speak the way we do? Why? How many people really care about minerality, about the colour of the wine, about astringency, about the amount of acid or tannin in a wine? Most of us just want to drink the wine, so why do we bother? Well, obviously there's reasons behind it, and the main one is just you're wanting to know what the wines taste like. So how do we describe the wines that we're reviewing and we're talking about? We have to use something, and if we don't use these descriptors, then yeah. But I have to admit, some of them blow my mind. I remember reading some, even online, the winemaker notes. And, oh my goodness, it was like some of them would be a novel. And it's talking about, chimney smoke on a cool winter's night, or, the aroma of crunching autumn leaves under your feet, on a muddy winter's day, or something, just making up all of this, just stuff. And why? I quite often, those of you who have listened and just followed this podcast, I do use a lot of stories to tell, to convey things, and to go through things. And sure, those of you who try the wines that I recommend, and probably saying, I don't taste the things that he is describing. One thing, and this is the key thing, is that I suppose a mentor of mine, he was kind of the catalyst for me going this way, one of them anyway. He said to me one night, and this is not his exact words, but basically, whatever you smell or taste is what you smell or taste. No, you're not wrong, and no one can tell you you're wrong. If you smell or taste it, then that's what there is. That's what's in, to you. Wine is very individual in that way. I can describe all of these different things, and other people can describe all these different things, but at the end of the day, you don't smell them. If you smell something else, if you don't smell boysenberry, but you smell blueberries, or if you don't even smell berries at all, you smell peaches. I like to tell you, you don't, who are, if you smell something, if you taste something, if you feel something or experience something with a wine, it's not wrong. And so that's the thing with tasting wine, is that, sure, we use things like phenolic, and I use phenolic all the time because, especially white wine and rosé. I'm just looking at a tasting note that I my scrawl that I do when I taste wines at work, and I'll show you the page. And I like to show you these pages because you get to see my doctor's handwriting. You get to see. I don't really put a lot into it, but it just jogs my memory. And one thing down here in the rosés is phenolic. Now, phenolic is essentially tannin, but for whatever reason, there's it's like a no-no to say tannin when you're talking about white wine. Yeah, that's the exact same thing. It just and vice versa. If you're talking about red wine, you say tannin. You don't say phenolics. It's just weird. And for those of you who don't know what tannin is, that's literally when you taste wine and it dries the sides of your mouth out. That's tannin. With white wine with astringency, it just tends to just phenolics. It tends to be a little bit drying, a little bit just drying. It dries out the palate a little bit, and I mean, if you don't know, again, astringency is another word, and that's sort of that drying, sort of tartness, sort of that pithiness. So you think of, if you eat, the pith of a citrus fruit, you get that astringency, a little bit of furriness. Black tea has that furriness. You get that tannin, not so much, not the same way as the pithiness, which really describes astringency. Where the phenolics, the tea describes the phenolics, because that's what tannin is. It's the phenolics. It's the it is almost like a woodiness to the wine or the tea. It's hard. And that's what you hear the phenolics, you hear tannin. I mean, there's going to be a myriad of things that get thrown out there that I'm not going to mention, but you hear all the time because, in the day, I mean, without sitting here for hours and hours thinking about all these different words, all this different jargon that gets used, things like, light, moderate, high acid. What does that mean? What does it feel like? And I mean, for me, lighter acidity, it's virtually undetectable. There's some acidity there, but you don't. It's not noticeable. Moderate acidity, it's there, but it's not sort of in your face. It's not saying, "Hello, here I am." It's more of, it's just there, And then high acidity, obviously, it's quite jarring. It's quite, it's like sucking on a lemon, And so when they're talking about acidity, they're just staggering it through that. And then tannin, the levels of tannin that they talk about. I mean, basically, it's the difference between a tea bag in there for 30 seconds, say in your tea, through to you've got 3 tea bags and you left it in there for half an hour and you're drinking the tea, kind of thing. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but, think about the levels. Like, imagine, like, something described it to me, it's like high tannin would just go straight up the sides of your mouth. Low tannin, you feel it just over here, and everything in between. So, it's when people are talking about low tannin, it's down here, high tannin, it's up here, talking about acidity, it's, low acidity, it's just like, that's there, it's detectable, but not in any way, shape, or form that it overwhelms. Moderate, it's there, when it's present, and it's happy, it's balanced, it's in, so then, your higher acidity. Another thing, just talking about balance. I mean, with balance, it's really how it feels in your mouth, how it works, interacts with the palate. It's balance. I mean, I use the word crunchy, especially talking about stone fruit. If I, when I talk about crunchy stone fruit, think about when you're eating, say, a peach or a nectarine that's not ripe, and so it's literally crunchy, and you're crunching it like an apple. It tastes like that to me, It's slightly furry, it's slightly, astringent, talking about astringency before phenolic. It's slightly drying in the mouth, and it's sharp and acidic, but it's still tasty at the same time. You know, just because it's crunchy doesn't mean it, and it's juicy doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's crunchy. Yeah. Maybe when you're eating a peach, you prefer a softer peach, but in a wine, it's quite delicious. Yeah. What else is something? I mean, florals. And I use florals quite a bit, but I'm not very specific. But sometimes, um, for me, when I'm smelling a wine, I've got a wine here that I haven't been sipping away on. Sometimes you smell a wine like this has a little bit of sort of, it's almost like, uh, this is where I'm getting very intrigued. It's uh, like grapefruit with sort of a yeastiness, little funkiness, and that is potentially a sign of um, of wild fermentation. So where they've just taken the grapes and started and let it ferment with the yeast that grows on the skins on the outside of the grapes. So that's enough to kick off fermentation, and you can sometimes get this sort of funkiness to the wine. The other thing, yeah, struck match or flint or anything else, that's just literally it's known as reduction, but it's something that you find in Chardonnay, especially ones that have been fermented with natural yeast. And it's literally, that's what it smells like. Quite often for me, it smells like uh, brie or camembert, the mold. It smells like that. Really interesting. And so I just call it, the sulphide funk. And so if you hear sulphides, there's sulfites and there's sulfides. Sulfides are that funky matchstick flint. It's a byproduct of fermentation of a yeah. And so yeah, if you hear that terminology, that's what they're talking about. That's the smells they're talking about. So I mean, sort of going through everything and just spending an hour talking about all these different intricate things that people analyze. Let's start taking this. I mean, let's be real. I mean, they talk about, like a sun-kissed cherry on a warm summer's day. Who cares about that? It tastes like cherry. Okay, cherry. And so this is where I try to be is quite direct and to the point. If I have a story, then I'll tell a story. It could be, gently brushed by dried herb and uh, a powder keg of spice or something, just going crazy, caressed by a you know smooth dark chocolate or what have you. Just like really, why do you have to go that silly with it? At the end of the day, one is to be drunk, and for me, the job of a reviewer is to convince you that the wine is good, if you think it's good. And so, well, not just convince, but give you an idea of whether you would like it or not. And so you go, oh yeah, I'll buy that, or I won't buy that. I mean, quite often things win trophies or they get a high score, and I think, I'll take that with a grain of salt. Reason being is because, and this is what you need to do too, is you need to weed through all the crap. You need to weed through all the propaganda, all the biases, because as much as I try to say that I don't, I do have biases. The producers that I really like the wines from, they're going to get a higher score than potentially someone down the road. Alternately, if, and I won't mention the reviewer's name, but when I was working at Scenic Cellars, we used to joke about a certain reviewer and a certain wine company, because every single wine would get either a 5-star when it probably should have been a 4-star, uh, you know, 4.5 stars when it probably should have just been a 3.5. It wasn't good. But for some reason, this reviewer would just give these outrageously high reviews to these wines that were average. And you'd see, what's going on? And at the time, I used to use it to the advantage of myself when I was trying to list the wines, because the merchant used to be a sort of a sub distributor to restaurants, and I was all but paid to push these wines to people, and so I'd use these inflated reviews to make them sound better. So they're like, "Oh wow, it's got this. Okay, let's put it on." All the while knowing in my head that it's not necessarily the best of wines. It's still, still fine, but personally, I didn't rate it. What was it? There's something, for instance, just today, the time of me recording this is going to come out, this would be 2 weeks prior to this coming out, but 3 weeks ago, this, just so you know, once you listen to this or watch this, I've actually been on holiday and come back. So the magic of these podcasts, I can pre-record them. I had a customer come into Lionel's, to the restaurant, and this woman used to own a wine store years ago. And she was telling me how good a particular wine was that won an accolade and everything else. She goes, "Oh, it's really good," rah. She goes, "Oh, it's just really easy drinking in there." And I thought, okay, yeah, I mean, not overly complex, but it ticks a box. And, it was at a show. And one thing with shows is that, for me, and this is, and going back to that episode I did a month or so ago, wine shows, they have hundreds of wines that have got a review. And so wines that stick out, they go, "Oh," and if it's made in a style that's generous, that's easy, that's in your face and plump, it's going to stand up and take note. Sure, it still has to go through other, other stepping stones, re-looking at things. But if your shortlist gets down to, say it started the class with 1,000 wines, and you might get down to, say, 200 out of those that are potentially the trophy winner. Out of those 200, it's still got to stick out again. So, of course, if it sticks out initially, it's probably going to stick out again and be like, "Hey, look at me, I'm so good," But when you try it at a later date or with other wines that weren't in the show, that just benchmarks of that variety from that region, rah, you go, "How did this win a trophy?" And it used to happen quite often that the merchant, would sit there, "How did this win a trophy? We tried it a month ago." And, and then quite often what would happen is that reps would come through and you just try and, like I've been doing regularly on this podcast, talking about wines that I've tried at the restaurant. You'd see a series of the same wines. I actually did I did an episode on that on Marlborough Pinot, because I was just trying a plethora of Marlborough Pinot. Most of them are really good. Some of them are very poor, but you start seeing which ones are really good and which ones aren't, based on that whole overall picture. I also have seen a lot of the whited upper Pinot recently, basically for the first half of this year, and you see the same thing. You go, "Oh, that's really good," but then you try another one, and you go, "Actually, it's better than this one," and so on and so forth. And you go, "Oh," you start thinking, I thought that was really good, but actually, it's not as good as this one. Oh, okay. And you start moving off in this direction. And so when you see the snapshot, and it's all about, too, how the wine's. One thing with reviews, what they use all the jargon, it's also how the wine is looking at the moment and what it makes people think. So, like, this is one I'm recording it the day after I recorded last week's, and I'm still drinking the same wine, and it's shifted a little bit, It's not as fresh. It's a little bit easier on the palate. It still has that pithy phenolic finish, which is really interesting, talking about phenolics. But yeah, wines change and evolve. So if you try something this month, you could find it has freshly picked blackberries, midsummer blackberries, but then the next time you try it, or somebody else tries it a month or so later, and like, I didn't even taste blackberries. This tastes like strawberries, And so you think, freshly picked blackberries, and they're talking about wild thyme and, smoked game meat. And it's like, what is going on here? And that, actually, that's another topic. When people smell some random things in wine, like smoked game meat, or, something I quite often smell in older wines, and I love the smell, is biltong. So if you don't, it's not jerky, but for want of a better term, it's jerky. And that smell, that rotting meat sort of thing, but not rotting meat at the same time. That's what it smells like. And get this rotten meat. Another smell that I used to smell all the time was fresh mussels, fresh seafood. I'm just like, what is this smell? It is actually a wine fault. I worked out later it's a wine fault. It's almost like opening, when you freshly open a bag of mescaline or a salad mix and you get a waft of smell. That's what it smells like. And it's actually a minor fault. Like, nothing too scary to worry about. But one thing I have to say is that I haven't seen it for years in a wine. I haven't smelt it, and you can imagine working at a fine wine shop, being the wine buyer, tasted a lot of wine, and to not see that for years, since prior to me even studying winemaking, is a good sign. It means that the winemaking has improved. Yeah, so I did start this episode saying I was going to take the piss out of myself, and I haven't really, sort of touched on it here and there, but realised the more I've got into this is how serious wine tasting is, how serious wine analysis is, and how sometimes we have to use these wanky words to convey what we feel when we're smelling or tasting these wines. Sure, we take the, we can make fun of these things all the time, and this clip that I was sent, and the link will be in the show notes, by the way, because it is quite funny. It's a good laugh, but there's a reason we do these things. There's a reason why we taste like this. I think you can go too far, but at the same time, there's method to the madness. So, I can't really jump all over wine critics and this and that, but just, if they are going too far, just take it with a grain of salt. Don't, obviously we do take it with a grain of salt, but if you want to get, a serious, meaningful thing out of it, weed out all of that crap and just find what you're looking for out of the one, whether it's tasty or not. Happy days. Okay, so yeah. Just taking a quick pause in the episode to remind you to like, subscribe, comment, and come and follow me on socials too. Move straight into the wine of the week with them on a flow. I'm going to go with the Miche's High Note 2021. The Pinot, stunning wine. It's it's something I'll wax on about because it's so good. And when we're talking about an episode about wine speak and wine wankery, this is me being a bit wine wankery about it. The colour was let's see, can't even read my own doctor's script, but the colour was deep ruby, obviously with a lighter edge as it moves towards the rim. And something else, if you hold the wine on an angle like this is how we look at colour, and you can see the edge. And most wines, you'll see that fade out. And if it's older, you'll get a clearer waterline. I was actually talking to one of the staff about it today. It literally is the water that's separating it. So as wines get older, all the particles try to get out and fall out, and it loses colour, and also increases that clarity around that water. So that's how you can tell the age, or the maturity, I should say, of the wine, not necessarily the age, because all wines are different and all wines age at a different rate. So you can see how mature it is and whether it's still got a bit of life in it or not. Anyway, the nose, cherries, dark berries, there was spice, lovely sort of perfume florals. So, like, flowers, but, ramped up. So it's almost like the essence of the flowers. So this, me talking about the wankery, but breaking it down. The spice was just like, almost turning the berries into sort of mulled spice, that warming winter mulled sort of character, but still that fruit there. Not cooked fruit, but fresh fruit, but just on the verge. On the palate, it was still quite fresh and lively with, the bright fruit. So that's what I mean. It hadn't gone to that properly cooked fruit, but there was still the savoury herb and spice finish. So that was one thing that really stood out to me, was the wine had a lovely savoury lift, which I look for all the time in really good Pinots, that savoury lift on the finish to sort of give you something more than just fruit, because, the cheaper Pinots out there, all you could just knock back. There's no complexity, there's no extra something. No, the tannin was present and it was firm, it was sort of a moderate, but fine. And what I mean by fine is, sorry, trying to break it down, is that it wasn't rough, it wasn't in your face, but it just had that lovely line that was there, ever present. And something's going on with this, so hopefully it's still recording. But yeah, and then moderate acidity, so that acidity was in check with the tannin, and just left with a long finish. So, when I talk about long, you sort of measure it in seconds. Basically, for me, if you're still before, if you can leave your wine there for 20 seconds, it's a long finish. Okay, it is flashing at me for some reason, so we'll just keep going. Hopefully, this is still recording. The score: 96 out of 100, 19.5 out of 20. Delicious wine, great wine. Go and find it. Not cheap, but well worth it. Lamb, game meats,